Welcome to Shad's Guitar Show. Whether it's the gear or the players who made the gear famous, join me each episode as we discuss all things guitar. Well, hello everyone and welcome into another exciting episode of Shad's Guitar Show. So glad to have you joining me today for this episode on the Piezo pickup. I didn't know hardly anything about how these worked. I mean, I know what it is, and I finally figured out that the universally accepted pronunciation seems to be Piezo rather than Piezo, but your mileage may vary. It's actually a Greek word, and we'll get into that. But before I go too much further, I just wanted to say that if you would like to support the show, if you've been listening and enjoying, check the show notes. There is a link to my Venmo. If you want to throw me a couple bucks, I can always use that for strings, picks, all the little goodies. And like I said, if you're enjoying the show and you want to support me in that way, that would be awesome. If you can't do that, but you do want to support me, it would be great if you would just leave a comment and let me know that you're enjoying the show. That would also mean a lot to me. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode on the Piezo pickup. All right, so you've heard that sound, that slightly glassy, almost piano-like clarity you get from an acoustic electric. That crisp, articulate tone under the saddle of a Taylor or a Takamine. Maybe you've even heard it criticized. It's too quacky, too plasticky, or maybe you love it. Either way, there's some genuinely fascinating science behind how this thing works, and once you understand it, you're going to hear Piezo tone completely differently. So let's get into it. Alright, so first things first, what even is a Piezo pickup? The word piezo comes from the Greek word piezin, which means to squeeze or press, and that's literally how it works. A piezo pickup generates an electrical signal from mechanical pressure, specifically the vibration of your guitar's strings and the top. No magnets, no coils, no electromagnetic field. This is a completely different technology from the humbucker on your Les Paul or the single coil on your Strat. Those work by detecting the movement of a metal string through a magnetic field. A piezo doesn't care about the magnetism at all. What it cares about is pressure and movement. So here's the physics, and I promise this is the cool part. Inside a piezo pickup, and this thing goes back to 1880 when two brothers named Pierre and Jacques Curie first discovered the phenomenon. There are crystals. Originally, these were natural crystals, but today most piezo pickups use a synthetic ceramic material called PZT. And these crystals have a remarkable property. When you physically deform them, squeeze them, bend them, apply pressure, they generate a voltage. An actual electrical charge appears across the crystal. No batteries needed for this part. The crystal itself is doing the work. And here's the flip side, which is equally wild. If you apply a voltage to the crystal, it deforms. It physically moves. That's how piezo speakers and buzzers work. Running electricity into them makes them vibrate. It's a two-way street. But for our purposes, for guitar, we're going in the other direction. Vibration goes in, electricity comes out. Now, where does a piezo pickup actually live on your guitar? Well, the most common place is under the saddle, the little strip of bone or synthetic material on your acoustic's bridge where the strings rest. You pull the saddle out of most acoustic electrics and you'll find a thin strip underneath it, usually black, about the same width as the saddle itself. That's the piezo element. Every time a string vibrates, it transfers energy down through the saddle, presses on that piezo element, and the crystal responds by generating a tiny electrical signal. That signal then runs through a wire to a preamp. More on that in a second. And then out to your amp or PA system. Some guitars use disc piezos instead, small round contact mics essentially glued to the inside of the top. These are common on nylon string guitars or budget acoustic electrics. They pick up the vibration of the whole top rather than just the saddle pressure, which gives them a different character, usually a little more room sound, for better or worse. And then there are MIDI guitars and high-end systems like the Graphtec Ghost or Roland GK pickups that use individual piezo elements for each string, one crystal per string, so the system can track each note independently. That's how you get a polyphonic pitch detection and guitar to MIDI conversion. Okay, I mentioned a preamp, so let's talk about that because it is crucial. The electrical signal that comes out of the raw piezo crystal is tiny, and more importantly, it has what's called a very high impedance. Think of impedance like resistance in an AC circuit. The piezo signal wants to flow through a very high resistance path, and it loses its character fast. If you plug a raw piezo straight into a standard guitar cable and then into a regular amp input, which has a much lower impedance, you get a signal that sounds thin, weak, and rolled off. The bottom end disappears, and frankly, it's not great. This is why acoustic electric guitars almost always have a preamp built in, usually a little module mounted to the side or the upper bout. That preamp does two things. First, it converts the high impedance piezo signal to a low impedance output that can travel down a standard cable without degrading. Second, it usually adds a battery-powered gain stage to bring the signal up to a usable level, along with EQ controls, your bass, middle, and treble, sometimes a notch filter for controlling feedback. The 9-volt battery in your acoustic electric, that's powering the preamp, not the pickup itself. The piezo doesn't need power. It generates power. So why does a piezo sound the way it does? That glassy, articulate, sometimes criticized as quacky quality comes from a few things. First, a piezo picks up everything. It's responding to mechanical vibration from the whole guitar. String attack, finger noise, pick scrapes, the tap of your thumb on the body, it's all there. Magnetic pickups are more selective. They're only responding to the movement of the metal string in the magnetic field. A piezo has no such filter. That's why acoustic electrics can sound almost too detailed through a PA if you're not careful. Second, the frequency response is very different from a magnetic pickup. Piezos tend to have a naturally high frequency emphasis. They're responsive to the transient attack of the note, that initial pick hit, in a way that can sound percussive and cutting. Great for strumming in a full band mix, but sometimes a little aggressive for quiet fingerpicking. Third, no inductance. Magnetic pickups have coils, and those coils create inductance, which affects the frequency response in a very specific and musical way. It's part of why a PAF humbucker has that warm, slightly rounded top end. Piezos have no coils, so you don't get that effect. The sound is more linear, more hi-fi, which some players love, and some find kind of sterile and cold. And here's something cool that a lot of players don't know. You can blend piezo and magnetic pickups. A lot of semi-hollow and solid body guitars now offer both a magnetic humbucker or single coil for your standard electric tones and a piezo under the saddle for acoustic style tones. The Parker Fly was one of the first guitars to do this in the 90s, and PRS has added piezo saddles to many of their Hollow Body 2 models as well as even some custom 24 guitars. When you blend the two signals, some players mix it 50-50 and others lean one way or the other. You get a genuinely unique sound. The warmth and sustain of the magnetic, plus the attack and articulation of the piezo. It's a hybrid tone that doesn't sound like either pickup on its own. Some players even run the two signals to two separate amps. The magnetic to a tube amp, the piezo to an acoustic amp, or straight to the board. Full stereo guitar rig. It's a rabbit hole, and I'll absolutely do a full episode on that someday. Before I wrap it up, let me give you a few practical takeaways. 1. Battery maintenance matters. Your piezo works fine without a battery, but your preamp doesn't. A weak battery is the number one cause of bad acoustic electric tone. Thin sound, low output, strange noises. Swap the 9-volt first before you blame anything else. 2. The saddle fit is critical. Because an under-saddle piezo works based on pressure, the saddle has to fit snugly in the slot and even make contact across the full length of the piezo element. A saddle that's even slightly tilted or loose will give you uneven string-to-string volume. If one string is always quieter through your pickup, check the saddle seating before you blame the pickup itself. 3. Piezo feedback is different. Magnetic pickup feedback is driven by the speaker moving the air that moves the strings through the magnetic field. Piezo feedback is driven by the body resonating from the speaker. A sound hole cover can help, but adjusting the notch filter on your preamp EQ, usually targeting somewhere between 100 and 200 Hz, is often more effective. And 4, if you want a warmer piezo tone, look at the preamp and downstream gear, not just the pickup. A dedicated acoustic preamp or DI box with the right impedance can make the same undersaddle strip sound dramatically warmer and more natural. The K&K Pure Mini, the LR Bags lineup, the Fishman Aura, these are all systems where a lot of the tone character lives in the preamp stage, not just the crystal. Alright, so there you have it. The piezo pickup, from the crystal chemistry to the understrip saddle in the preamp side of your guitar. It's an elegant technology, honestly. The fact that squeezing a crystal makes electricity still feels like magic to me, even though I now know the science. Whether you love piezo tone or you're not its biggest fan, I hope understanding how it works gives you some new respect for it, and maybe some new tools for dialing it in. If you've enjoyed this episode on the piezo pickup, please make sure and share it with a guitar playing friend. And also, wherever you're listening, leave me a 5-star review. It's incredibly helpful, and I thank you in advance for doing that. Also, next time you're on YouTube, make sure you head over to Shad's Guitar Show and subscribe. And when you're on Instagram, follow Shad's Guitar Show there as well. There's plenty of interesting content there in addition to the show, and I look forward to having conversations with you there as well. And remember, if you keep listening, I'll keep talking about all things guitar.